Good morning.
Hello, good morning, Darcy.
Good morning.
Finally.
That was kind of crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I guess we can start.
Okay, should I add up my video, or sorry, should I add my presentation and go through it myself? Yes?
Yeah, later. Yeah. Yeah, sure. I will open the virtual talk first and then we can continue, right?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, thank you again for the patience. You all been waiting. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good night, everyone. Since our participants today come from all around the globe with different time zone, I think that's the most appropriate greetings. Welcome to the SPE Virtual Talk 2020, organized by SPE Balikpapan section. Today we'll have another interesting topic called Reducing Methane Emissions in the Oil and Gas Value Chain by Mr. Darcy Spady. My name is Tiresal Rahman. You can call me Ichal. I am your moderator for today. I am from Pertamina Hulu Mahakam, currently working as Head of Well Intervention Offshore Engineering Services. In this occasion, I would like to thank Pertamina as our sponsor for this Microsoft Teams platform in this virtual talk. All right. Before proceeding to the presentation, I will read today's rule of the SPE virtual talk. First one, our speaker will present the topics for approximately 30 minutes. During the presentation, you can post the question in the chat box. Don't forget to mention your name and then where you come from. And at the end of the presentation, we'll proceed with the question and answer session. We'll choose the question in the chat box to be answered by our speaker later. Okay, before I invite Mr. Darcy to present, let's talk a little bit of our speaker profile. So Mr. Darcy Spady, he was 2018 SPE President, Bachelor of Science, Petroleum Engineering, University of Alberta, currently Managing Partner of Carbon Connect International based in Calgary, Canada. Okay, hello, Mr. Darcy. Sorry for the long wait. How are you doing?
We are good. Thank you. Good morning from Calgary.
Oh, good morning. This already like 8:17 here in Balikpapan, almost bedtime. Okay, so without further ado, let's start the presentation. The time is yours. I'll let you share.
Okay, do we have the presentation going? I think if you want to page through rather than me adding it, or would you like me to add the presentation?
Okay, I think you can share the presentation from there.
Okay, I'm going to have a moment to get it loaded up on my end. Anyway, as I'm loading, I will talk. It's been it's taken a while to get loaded in, and I'll just excuse me while I load up. CCI. Sorry. If you wish to, Ichal, if you can just take a moment and talk about a couple of the things that you're doing in the Balikpapan section. How big is your section? How many members do you have there? How often do you meet?
Oh, in Balikpapan section, for the SP is quite active because normally we perform this kind of activity in regular basis. This is one of the example. Normally we come to the university to have some workshop together with the young generation, and there's some many others activity like the specific one, like the reservoir topics and then the drilling topics and etc. And this time it is in the environmental section.
How many members? How many people do you have? Is it 500 people or?
I guess it's more. Let me check the exact numbers.
Not a problem. I have been to Jakarta section. I have not been to Balikpapan section, so hopefully in the future I can do that. I look forward to it. Okay, I need to add my presentation here. and I'm not exactly sure how to do it. I have it up. If I hit share,
Share desktop. Yes.
I'm not seeing share desktop, but let's find out. This COVID crisis has caused all of us to be much better IT people, but I think that does not include me. I am not seeing share. Okay, here we go, share. And now I'm going to,
Choose it.
can you see that?
Yes. Yes, we can see it.
And you can see that in full in slideshow in a second. I'm going to just turn off my camera for a moment and let the presentation show. Is it showing well now? Or is it very small? There we go. Okay, this is not perfect because it shows my side slides, but you know what? We have to get going because I was late.
Okay, we can see it.
So here's an outline. We'll walk through it. Methane emissions, why? Who cares? Where does it come from? Why is it dangerous? Where do emissions occur? And what we're doing about it. And I have a very good example in Canada, what we're doing about emissions. Am I coming across okay, or is my signal, my bandwidth too full? Can you hear me fairly well?
Yeah, we can hear it.
And you can see the presentation okay?
Yeah, the presentation is good.
Okay, good. So why methane? What's the big thing? Well, if you look at this picture of this fellow in Bahrain last year, you'll see that it doesn't say the Society of Petroleum Engineers at the podium and behind the podium. What does it say? It says the Society for Professionals in Energy. This is pretty rare. But we're more than just petroleum engineers. We are professionals in energy. So methane is very, very relevant. So I hope you can see this picture. It's the most Indonesian picture I could find. It's the folks down in Jakarta at Trisakti. I hope that makes a few of you smile. And that's as close to Balikpapan as I have got, and I hope I can change that in the future. That's the introduction part. Now let's talk a little bit about methane. Paris Agreement, right? Signed in 2016, deals very strongly with GHG emissions. And the long-term goal, of course, is to keep the increase below 2 degrees. And what has happened is we have a tremendous amount of pressure from shareholders, from environmental groups, from social governance to actually meet the Paris Accord. Canada was a signatory. We take it very seriously. All of our oil and gas regulatory bodies here in Canada have made it mandatory to meet some very stringent regulations, which has made us leaders in the methane space. So I'll say that you can research the Paris Accord all you want and learn probably more than me. But what are we talking about? I just want to jump to that. So on a global basis, greenhouse gas emissions by the type of gas. So everybody talks about CO2. Well, CO2 is bad. And there's a lot of it, but methane is the second biggest source of greenhouse gas after carbon dioxide. But from a greenhouse warming potential, or GWP, it's 25 times worse. 25 times worse. So it's only a quarter of the problem from a volume point of view, but it's 25 times worse from a global warming potential point of view, which makes it a very big target. And if you want to know how the 25 times worse for global warming works, there are plenty of calculations or examples that you can see on the web. It's pretty straightforward. So we've established that methane is bad. Now we need to look where it comes from. So we have natural sources such as wetlands and volcanoes and other things. We won't worry about those for now. From the anthropogenic sources, we're going to focus on that because out of those, agriculture, of course, cows, plants, fossil fuels, waste, biofuels, biomass. Out of all those, the one we can make a difference with. This is what SPE is all about, making a difference. And so the one we can make a difference with is fossil fuels, which is a very large percentage, a very significant percentage. So we'll concentrate on that source of anthropogenic methane emission. Out of fossil fuels, here's where we start to, it really starts to matter as SPE members. I'm just going to switch my camera back on here because it looks like my bandwidth is working okay. Each shall tell me if the signal quality goes down when I turn on my camera. So from our methane emission sources, here's where it comes from. Now, if you have offshore operations, you don't have a lot of fugitives. There's not a lot of venting. But from an onshore point of view, there's a lot of fugitives. There's a lot of planned venting, some compression. A big culprit is the blue, the pneumatics. So let me go another step. I'm going to turn my camera off. It does seem to affect my bandwidth. So I'm not sure if you're live, but is that correct? Am I coming across okay?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, good.
And the slide display is okay too. Good.
Okay, so that's the sources. Let's see where they occur. And here we have another wonderful SPE picture of the South Asia qualifying event back in 2018. I don't know if maybe some of these faces are familiar, but I like pretty pictures. So where do these methane emissions come from that we talked about 2 slides ago? The fugitives, the pneumatics, the things like that. Well, I have categorized it pretty much across the industry as the following 6 places. Drilling completions and workovers are temporary and we don't pay much attention to them. The rig comes in, we do our thing. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard the term or written the term in your daily report, bleed off pressure to atmosphere. How many times in a cementing operation, in a fracturing operation, in a pigging operation do we bleed off to atmosphere? Well, those are bad words. But many times in the temporary drilling completion workovers, they're common words, bleed pressure to atmosphere. So that's very difficult in a temporary sense to catch emissions. The low-hanging fruit is the permanent facilities, well site processing, facilities, and pipelines. And you know the wonderful thing about all this? Well site processing facilities and pipelines are all designed. Therefore, we know where every single spot is that's planned to leak. Any pneumatic device, we know where it is in the PNID. Vents, we know where they are. Flare stacks. So we can fix the permanent quite quickly. So let me go over a few definitions. So fugitive emissions are unintentional. These might include leaks, malfunctioning equipment, process interruptions. Specifically, leaks are often designed like, leaks are through pressurized equipment such as flanges, seals, joints, or cracks that when they were installed should not release gas. So again, we know where that equipment is. We can put a new seal, joint, flange, or crack in, and so it's avoidable. The final definition I want to just talk about is venting. Venting is planned. They are part of the design of the facility, design of the pipe, design of the unit, but they don't always offer as planned. How many times do you see a pneumatic device that's filled with wet gas and it's all gummy and it's just stuck open. So we know there's a pneumatic device there. We know it should work, but it's just venting gas to atmosphere. That happens more often than we want to admit. So let's take a look at some pictures. This whole general cloud of waste gas and where it comes from. Easy to define. Easy to define. Do not be sad, petroleum engineers and Pertamina employees and people who work in oil and gas service. Do not be sad, because we know where everything is coming from. We know the culprit. So here we go. Pneumatic devices are in both drilling and completion. They are in plants. They are in facilities. We know where every compressor is. If you don't know where your compressors are, perhaps you have a problem. We know where compressors are, and we know that they're designed to vent a little bit. We know where our processing facilities, our dehighs, we know where they are. We planned them. And there we have a circle on the dehy column, or in the dehy process. It's probably a tank with several vents that are not working or are working properly and venting to atmosphere. We know where the production tanks are.
We know where the production tanks are.
This should not be a surprise. Thief hatches, temporary 400-barrel tanks. We know where they are. Pigging operations. How many times do we vent or blow down pressure in a pigging operation? That pressure should be collected because that's emission. Well completions. Now it says here well completions and unloading. In North America, there's a lot of fracturing, and post-fracturing flowback is a key culprit. So there we have a temporary location, and of course, there sits a 400-barrel tank. I don't know if you call them 33 cubic meter tanks in Indonesia, but we still call them 400s, even though we haven't used barrels for many years. And there's blanket gas over all of our facilities. So if you add all these things together, these are fugitive emissions. They are not intended, or sometimes intended, to release to atmosphere, because as we designed this equipment, we designed it to have a fail-safe and go to atmosphere. So when we have a problem that's this easy to tackle, it just means we have to tackle it. So I spent 35 years in drilling and completions and business development and some policy work. And only in my last year as SPE president did I realize that we had a massive problem in sustainability and environmental fugitives and issues that we as petroleum engineers can fix. And it was my friend and 2019 SPE president, Dr. Sami Al-Nuaim, that really got my attention to sustainability. And this is where we as petroleum engineers, as SPE, Society of Professionals in Energy, this is where we need to focus, because the world is watching. So what do? I started a company back in October called Carbon Connect International, and I thought I'd do some training. Well, a big surprise to me was we've done very little training, thanks to COVID, but we have done a lot in the program management side of methane emission. And Alberta has a very sophisticated regulatory process. The Alberta Energy Regulator, AER, is the owner of the resource. We have state-owned oil and gas here in Canada. And this owner is a very good owner that takes it very seriously. And so we have had them bring out a directive, a law, essentially, called Directive 60, which is very stringent on methane emissions. And so I'm very proud and happy to be in a jurisdiction that takes methane emissions very, very seriously. And one of the things that we at CCI are in the business of is managing oil and gas operators identify and fix methane emissions through technologies that are readily available. And I'm going to list them because it's so easy. As you're listening, think of your own operation, whether it's near Balikpapan or somewhere on one of the other islands or some other part in Southeast Asia. Here's 9 different categories where we, on a regular basis, have emissions. Pneumatic devices. Anytime you have something that builds up pressure and goes puff when it releases it, you have a problem. So many of those devices can be removed with electrification, a solar skid and an actuator, instrument air or an air compressor powering the device instead of sales gas. We have an easy target with high bleed pneumatic instruments, and we can convert those to low bleed. So we know them as high to low bleed. I talked about instrument gas to instrument air. And we have vent gas capture from pneumatic devices. So if your pneumatic device is big enough, you can capture the exiting gas and re-inject it. The other huge culprit is storage tanks. We can either destruct that through a high temperature combustor, or we can put a vapor recovery unit on the hatch. And then we have compressors, a lot of compressors. Look into it. A lot of compressors have planned venting. We can capture that gas and reutilize it. And then here, the last two are the ones that personally are very close to me because I've spent most of my life in the drilling or fracturing or completion side. We put post-frac desanders on wells all the time to catch the sand before it goes into the pipe. We bleed those back to atmosphere. That is not good. And then the other culprit, which is always one we're fighting, is surface casing vent flows and gas migration in cementing. That's a tougher one to catch, but that is methane emission. So the other thing that I do and my company does is we do methane emission. We call them MEM, methane measurement and mitigation training courses. So we'll do this in the SPE training catalog. You can read it there. You can sign up for a course. I think the next one was going to be in in Brisbane, Australia, as part of the Fugitive Emissions Workshop for SPE. The KL office is organizing. I think that's gone virtual, but I believe it's in September. So we will do training courses and they give professional development credits, or we can make various versions of courses for governments, for banks, for regulators, for policy people. We were talking with some groups like UN, IEA, ASEAN, just offering our services a lot of times with the help of the Canadian trade commissioners or the Alberta office. There's a great Alberta office from our government in Singapore in the region. So we can do this through any number of means. But the bottom line is, I am now in the business of methane mitigation, and whether we do it through training people as to how, whether we do it through policy, or whether we do it through changing out pneumatic devices and vents on location, it is a massive, massive procedure, and all of us as SPE members need to be concerned about it. To conclude, methane measurement is large and emerging area. There are many qualified companies who can help. I know in Canada, because of the regulations, we have a tremendous amount of qualified people. I'm sure in Indonesia there are plenty. Europe has a lot. One of the things we are finding is that measurement and reporting, and I would even go back a step in LDAR, leak detection, baseline measurement, current measurement and reporting should be holistically approached. So right from the initial determination of leaks, whether it's through satellite or FLIR devices, it needs to be holistically approached. A jurisdiction or a company needs to take a baseline measurement and then identify the known and unknown emissions and deal with it holistically. Data is key, and holding on to the data, especially of the baseline and what you've done with it, is critical. The bottom line is we make more money. If we're not venting methane to atmosphere, we're selling it to the market. So really, it's an efficiency thing. Less gummy, liquid-rich gas plugging things, less venting of fugitives to the atmosphere. All of that means more gas in the sales line, which is where we make our living. Canada, I'm thankful to say, is a global leader in these technologies. Many small vendors, and you can certainly find me or others in our area. We have a group called the Methane Emission Leadership Alliance, MELA, and they have about 30 or 32 members, of which we are part, that have all kinds of technologies available very cost effectively. And these quick reductions can be very cost effective, and depending on what part of the world you're in, you can even get carbon credits for your reductions. So at this point, I will stop talking. It's 6:40 a.m. in my part of the world. It's probably 20 minutes from 8 p.m. in your part of the world, or 20 minutes from 9 p.m. It's time to have dinner. Ichal, I'm so sorry that I started late. I think I've made my point. I would love to hear if you have any questions. I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much to the Balikpapan section for reaching out. I will promise that I will try my best to get there as soon as I can.
Thank you, Darcy, once again. We'll be glad to have you here. So what an interesting subject. So I already have several questions in the chat box. For those who still want to ask, you can post the question in the chat box. Don't forget to mention your name and then where you come from. Okay, the first question, it doesn't mention the name here. The question is, Darcy, what is your sustainable strategy step in reducing methane emissions in the oil and gas value chain? So he or she asking about the sustainable energy strategy step.
Well, I think the step is critical. The strategy is to reduce methane emissions. Mm-hmm. The step is you've got to measure them. Mm-hmm. So baseline measurement, mitigate the problem. And whether it's a company or a government entity forcing the baseline measurement, you have to get the baseline measurement, and then you know how big the problem is, and then you can identify it. That has to be the strategy. And maybe it's a government that starts it. Maybe it's a company. Maybe it's a body like the UN or the ASEAN. But the strategy has to be measure and then mitigate. I hope that's not too simplistic, but that would be my answer.
Next question. Okay, this is the good one. Some countries already apply high carbon pricing. Is it really effective to reduce the emissions?
Absolutely. I love countries that have carbon pricing. I am part of that, in that I live in a province, in a country that has carbon pricing, mm-hmm. And it works. It works if you have a strong jurisdiction. So in Alberta, we have a carbon price. I think it's in the $20 range, moving towards the $30 range per ton. That would be Canadian currency. So I don't know, that 75% of that for US. Our dollar is like the Australian dollar for reference. Our federal government is a little higher, but what happens is if you have a jurisdiction like Alberta, the province of Alberta, where the regulator is run by the province, you can say the market for carbon is $22 a ton. And so if you reduce methane by this much by installing something, you can define the difference, you can calculate the GHG savings, you can say we have saved 100 tons because we put an actuator in that was solar powered to replace a pneumatic device. We can write it down, we can measure it, we can say we saved 100 tons of GHG equivalent to atmosphere of methane. That is worth 100 tons times $22 a ton. That is a set amount. And the regulator and make sure there is a strong carbon trading market. It works very well because suddenly the operator says, oh, it's going to cost me $20 a ton in taxes, or I can get carbon offsets if I do the same thing, if I put a device in to replace that. Either way, I can get paid a amount of money. The problem is, in a global scale, the offsets are not as robustly priced because it's a very open market. So if you're talking $6 or $7 a ton, maybe, if you can find a buyer, that's a lot of work for an independent operator in, let's just pick Pakistan. They have to find a market, they have to find a purchaser, they have, and it might be down in the $5, $6, $7 a ton. We see that it works very well if the jurisdiction keeps it robust. So if the jurisdiction can keep the price of carbon between $20 and $30 a ton, it makes a lot of sense for operators to then start reducing for the carbon credits. So yes, carbon credits work wonderfully, but you must have a robust jurisdiction. If there's any regulators from the Indonesian government listening, come to Canada, come to Alberta, look at how we do it. It works really, really well, and it forces operators to change equipment that leaks methane into the atmosphere. I love it.
Okay, that is very clear. Okay, next question. Oh, this one from the Cesar Patino, the SPE Regional Director from Latin America. Okay, the question. Okay, this is how PRMS reserves will be taken consideration of our actions in decarbonization, as is claiming any action or valorization of the decarbonization process.
Good afternoon, Cesar. Thank you for joining. Or good morning, Cesar. It's probably not noon in Bogota.
Yeah.
It's probably only 9 o'clock. He's probably on his second Colombian coffee. You should be drinking Sumatra coffee, Cesar.
That's a good
Colombian coffee. Great question. So PRMS, I always get the initials wrong. PRMS, Petroleum Reserve Management System, that SPE is a part of course, is a wonderful global categorization system that allows us to tie economically our reserves. It works really well. It's a lot of collaboration from a lot of people. And so it takes a lot of work, but it is defined reserves. The next step, thank you, Cesar, for bringing it up. The next step for SPE is to have a CRMS, or a carbon-based accounting system for reserves management, which means if you're booking your reserves with a bank and you say, I'm flaring on the other end, or in my facilities, you will have less value in the ground than if you say, I'm combusting at a high temperature and removing GHGs from the atmosphere. So it's not we, it's I and Cesar probably, we want to see CRMS as a key part of the SPE mix going forward. We want to see carbon effect or carbon intensity affect reserves value. Now, we have a little bit of a system in the RMS, the storage. We have a committee together. We do some work on the storage reservoir management system, basically from a carbon point of view, and the CCS, or carbon capture storage point of view. We need to take that one step further and talk about carbon management so that non-CCS operators can look at how much carbon they're using and how they're disposing of fugitives and tie that to reservoir value. So I know there's things going on. I know I'm part of them going on in the CRMS field. And so I'm looking forward to future SPE where carbon intensity, methane emissions, fugitive emissions are part of your reserves management system. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Darcy. Okay, we move on to the next question. This is anonymous. The World Bank has a program called Zero Routine Flaring to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. However, not all the major already joined the initiative. Do you have any perspective on this, and how do you think this program will attract the major to join?
Yeah, a great question. Yes, the World Bank does have a flaring reduction program. I'm not sure. I'm working with a fellow by the name of Mr. Zubin Bamji from the World Bank. He has a team on this. There are, I'm forgetting whether it's 16 or 60 countries signed up to this. I think it's 16. There are some very important countries signed up as part of this program. The problem, well, I don't want to talk about problems. It's a wonderful thing. It just needs more teeth and more participation. So I think they are bang on in dealing with flaring and dealing with the effects of flaring and making sure that instead of flaring, we don't just vent, because that's worse. So I think the World Bank initiative is tremendous. They're working with other banks. I'm assuming they're working with Asian Development Bank in your region. It's a wonderful initiative. I want to see, as an industry, I want to see it have the teeth of a regulator to say, you're flaring, here's the penalty, not just you're flaring, don't do that. So I love the program. It's the right way to go. It's part of the solution. Zubin and his team are working hard on it. It's a great initiative, but I want to see it, number one, grow, and number two, get teeth or more teeth so that we can take it much more seriously. But it's a wonderful program.
Okay. Okay, we have question. This is from Kenya, Rita Maina. The question is OpenLCA is a good open source software to calculate the greenhouse gas or methane emissions in your value chain? So the OpenLCA.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not as familiar with some of the software sources. There are a number out there. I would suggest that multiple models have multiple answers, but they're all going for the same goal. And so, to me, I would say anything you can use that will give calculations for leak detection or some form of assessment, some sort of fugitive assessment. Anything is better than nothing. And in time, there might be something that's more universal or more standard, but pick whatever platform you can and use it. Some of the universities have good systems. Some of the regulators have good systems. I am not very familiar with that. I have people that I work with that are, so I can't comment directly on the OpenLCA other than to say that any sort of software modeling that gives us a clue of how much we're emitting is a good thing. If you want a little more secondary answer to that question, I would hear it again, because it's a very relevant question. It's just not so much my area of expertise.
Okay, finally we have a question here from Balikpapan. This is coming from Ranto. He's asking about the biogas. Darcy, what do you think about the role of biogas so far in efforts to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions? It's pretty popular, biogas in Indonesia.
Yeah, and that's wonderful if it's used in a sustainable manner. I'm very unfamiliar with it. In our region in Alberta, we don't have as many trees as you do in Indonesia. In the mountains where the trees are, there is no oil and gas operations. So I think biogas is critical. It's, we have, as in general, as SPE members, we have to realize that fossil fuels are powering 80% of the world's energy needs. That's too much. We need to be at 60. We need to have other sources of energy that are viable and commercial and competitive with us. We need to see all we can in those areas. So to me, biogas is a critical mix for the energy future. Let's just make sure that we're capturing and burning in an efficient manner and not venting and flaring or wasting. So I don't know that much about it, but it's a critical mix. Now on the chart I showed earlier, it's a smaller component, but it's still there. I'm just not very familiar with it. I'm looking for some Indonesians to educate me on how to do it right.
Okay, we have another question. Oh, there's a lot of questions actually. It's a very interesting subject. Okay, next question. Low carbon economy is currently one of the hot topics in the industry. How do you see this as the future of circular carbon economy? And you can predict how long it will take in years. Oh, we have to predict, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot of mentality changes. Starting with you and me, right? What kind of a car do we drive? Is it fuel efficient? Is it electric, tied to a hydroelectric dam like all of our Norwegian friends? That's helping the planet. What kind of a home do we live in? Do we share walls with others? In North America, we don't. We like our own houses. So moving to a low carbon economy is going to require a lot of steps. It is necessary. Sometimes I hear petroleum engineers say, oh, then I won't have a job. Wrong. We have spent the last 50 years getting the first 33% recoverable out of the ground. We will need 10 times more of us to get the next 20% out of the ground. So the easy stuff is gone. So as petroleum engineers or professionals in energy, PE, we have a very big future getting the hard stuff out. We will be around for a long time. The world is still going to need fertilizer. They're still going to need plastics. They're still going to need high temperature burning materials for the making of cement and steel. So we as petroleum engineers, as hydrocarbon people, are going to be needed for a long time. And there's going to be 10 times more of us needed because it's harder. So the low carbon economy and petroleum engineering go hand in hand. The tough stuff has to get out of the ground. That's our job. The consumer side has to decrease. We have to share walls. We have to drive efficient vehicles. We have to think about our carbon footprint. Every time we step on a piece of concrete or wood, we have to say, did that come from a tree or did that come from a high temperature clinker process? Concrete takes energy. Steel takes energy. Fertilizer, 40% of the world's green stuff is fertilized. Where did that fertilizer come from? Us. So I think the low carbon economy and how we're going to get there, our targets in Canada tend to be 2040. I think that's too long. So by when? 2030 is 10 years away. Let's make a significant difference in 10 years. Let's catch fugitive emissions in 10 years. Let's do 2030. What can we do by 2030? It's part of our psyche as petroleum engineers. Now, those of us in the older brackets, maybe it's too late. But the people coming new into the career, they have a completely different mentality, and it's about a low carbon way of thinking. So I have great hope for the future. I have great hope for the industry, because all of you out there who are young professionals, you're going to make the difference in the world, and you think differently. You compost food, you share walls, you ride bicycles, you use trees instead of steel. I mean, it's a holistic change of thinking that the young generation has much better. So I've probably offended about half the audience by saying all these things, but that's what I believe.
Okay, we are going to the next question. Would you please elaborate the cost of reducing methane emissions in oil and gas industry?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Yeah, the cost of reducing methane emission in oil and gas industry, the estimate, the cost.
Okay, yeah. You know what? There is no cost.
Okay.
Because we keep sales gas in the line and we're more efficient. So honestly, there's an upfront payment and that brings us returns. I'm being a little silly when I say that. Of course, there's a cost. Our federal government in Canada has announced a program where there's, I don't know, $500, $600, $700 million put aside for methane mitigation across the board. So that's maybe 500 million US. That's one country. They've announced numbers like that to get people doing the equipment changes and stuff. But really, what's the cost of that? That's part of the economy. Thousands of manufacturers, thousands of solution providers, and in the end, we're putting less methane into the atmosphere. So when I was running a little oil company, publicly traded company called Contact Exploration 12 years ago, I remember my losses, my gas shipping report every month to market, my marketing. And I remember there was a column always that was called shrinkage. I don't know how you ship in Puerto Mina. It's very large numbers probably, and you may not see your monthly report, but the little guys, you know, every month I saw this 6-7% shrinkage. It's like, what is shrinkage? It's cold out there, but how much is shrinking? Well, shrinkage is joint venture, partner, fees, processing loss, maybe a little bit of line loss, plant loss through pneumatics, bad accounting, bad measurement. That's shrinkage. 6 or 7% of every month's profitability was 6 or 7% in shrinkage. I think 1 full percentage point of that number, 1%, was methane fugitive emissions. That was 10 years ago. If I can take 1% of my net profitability back into my bank, methane emission mitigation is not a cost, it's a profit. If I'm keeping that sales gas in my sales line instead of letting it go to atmosphere, that's more money for me to sell. So I don't like to talk about methane emission reductions or fugitive emissions as a cost. It's efficiency and selling more gas in the line. And when we start talking to the world out there, to investors, to shareholders on stock exchanges about, no, we are capturing every molecule that we can and selling it. It makes them more money and it makes the planet healthier. We win. So yes, there's a cost. Our government, our federal government has said, you know, we're committing this much to methane. Yes, there's a cost. But how much of it goes back into the economy and how much of it is saving things that we're ultimately going to pay for? So I don't think truly long-term there is a cost.
Okay, we are moving to the next question. This is coming from Gerardus from Pertamina Hulu Mahakam, the same office with me. Yeah, I was just wondering, legal is one thing to control the emissions. However, what about the real action that needs to be taken? You were mentioning, for example, about the converting or flowing the gas into another system. Is this the investment going to pay off? Because companies getting skeptical about investing today. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, there's regulations which force people to do this. Yeah, that's, you know, we have, sometimes we don't like to pay for regulations. That's okay. But you know, think about the efficiency. There's a company here in Canada, a member of the methane emission alliance called Slipstream, or that deals with slipstream technologies. And yes, it costs a value to put one of those systems into your compressor exit. There's a cost, but almost everything you have that's costly, whether it's the Slipstream people or another company I work with, General Magnetic has a Magnasol system, which is a solar injection skid that replaces a pneumatic device. Let's say it costs you $10,000 or $15,000 to remove a pneumatic device and put a solar panel and an actuator in. That is actually, can be very easily paid for over 5 years or 10 years on a per unit basis if you look at the losses. And you know how I know that's true? Because the carbon offset people will sometimes finance those projects. So if somebody's financing the project by selling carbon offsets, which of course is an artificial economy, I guess you could say that, but if somebody is using carbon credits to finance a methane reduction device, there is an economic value in it. So they can define how much it's costing, how much they're paying you, and how much they're getting back in credits. If this can be calculated, almost every single thing we do, whether it's a thief hatch on a tank or a slipstream on a compressor or a solar powered actuator to remove a pneumatic device, almost every single one of those can be amortized, or the value of the gas saved can be calculated, and it might be 20 years. But let me ask you this. Back when rigs were all about, on the drilling floor, was all about throwing a chain and using tongs and doing every single joint connection by hand. When we moved to what we called one-arm bandits here in Canada, we moved to all those automated rig floor, super singles that could do all kinds of drilling without people. They were costly. Now, that's how every rig runs. It's all automated. Was that a big investment? Yes. Did it take years to pay off? Yes. Now, are we reaping the benefits 20 years later from having uber efficient rigs where a guy sits inside and a joystick and a couple of robots, and people don't lose fingers and arms anymore? Was there a cost? Absolutely. Was it the right thing to do? Absolutely. So I don't have a lot of time for too much arguing about the real cost. Ultimately, it's going to be the efficient thing to do. And if the regulatory agencies push you a little ahead in time, good. That's why I like a carbon offset market that's robust, because that can often push the economic trading of carbon offsets that don't go into the atmosphere.
Okay. Well, thank you. Okay. I believe we only have room for two last questions. This one coming from Mustafa from GGC Indonesia. What program is the most effective for pollution from the oil and gas industry?
Did he say what program is the most effective for pollution?
Yeah, for the pollution from the oil and gas industry.
So number one and number two in this field is flaring and tanks. So I don't really know where Indonesia stands. If you have a lot of oil with a lot of volatile gases, and your tanks are venting, thief hatches, planned venting, when they do the satellite passes, another little company called GHG Sat, wonderful little company that does satellite level, Canadian company. Okay, I'm a little biased, but they do satellite passes over oil fields. The big culprit when you see it from a distance is tanks and tank venting. But equally big is flaring. Now, in Canada, because we have thousands of little wells with very small flaring situations, it's a little more controllable because you can define per plant, per well, per whatever. In places like Indonesia, I'm suspecting some of the flaring is way bigger and much harder to deal with. Because you might be in an offshore or remote location, and you get, there's a lot of different issues. So I think number one and number two culprit are tank venting, number one, and flaring, equally number one, depending where you are in the world. Both have solutions. If you need to flare, there are several people, Questor Technologies, Black Gold Rush are two that come to mind from here in Calgary. They both provide high temperature incinerators. They're used here. And so what you're putting into the atmosphere is a wee tiny little bit of carbon instead of a big old flare. So there's technology there for the tank venting and for the flaring. There's technology. And if the World Bank gets their way with their flaring regulations or recommendations, that's going to help make people think twice about flaring too. So I think those are the two biggest problems, if that answers the question, is tank venting and flaring, depending where you live.
Okay, that's great.
Okay. Don't worry about time, Ichal. I have lots of time. It's supper time for you.
Okay. The next question. Oh, this is a good one. Since we have also some really young generation participate in this virtual talk, still in high school year or college year. So what do you suggest for them in order to contribute in regards of this emission? The second one is regarding the carbon emission reduction in regards of the educational syllabus to college students. And what are the implications in several countries which are still depending mainly in carbon fossil fuel.
Yeah, sorry, the second question, can you just repeat that? I was writing down the first one.
Yeah, the second one, the educational syllabus in the college students normally still depending mainly in the carbon fossil fuel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are the implications in several countries regarding this?
Yeah. And as SPE president, I traveled to 49 different countries in 3 years. I went to a lot of student chapters. I'm very impressed. I understand it's a curriculum thing, it's a future thing, but here's the bottom line. For 50 years, us old guys did it our way. The world thinks of oil and gas people a certain way. Sometimes they think of us as driving big cars and liking our product. That's gone. We've retired, we've moved on. Who has the vision for the future? The young people. Who understands low carbon economy? The students. I beg all of you young people, think of how you act as a human being. Think of what you do. Think of your neighbors. You know, I like to use the example, if I'm a young person and I'm going to buy a house and I'm going to move into a neighborhood, I want to move into a neighborhood that has artists and financial people and craftspeople and politicians. I don't want to move into a neighborhood with a whole bunch of oil and gas people just like me. Why? Because if the only people you talk to all day at work are oil and gas people, and the only people you talk to at night are oil and gas people, you're going to start thinking inside of a very small bubble. Be a human. Learn the arts. Embrace the arts. There's a reason why I carried an accordion around when I traveled, because I want people to be holistic human beings, kind to their neighbors, and hearing their opinions, which might be different than yours. And the young generation of petroleum engineers, professionals in energy, understand the more holistic nature of being a citizen of the planet. 2019 President Dr. Samuel Nuaim used to use the term which been around for a while, citizen engineer. Be a better person. Be an energy provider. So I think for young people, there's a tremendous future. And I would suggest that in your petroleum engineering studies, you get into carbon intensity studies, you get into methane and fugitive emission studies. You understand what you're doing that the public doesn't like venting and flaring. Understand it and be a better citizen. Use some of these things, like the question came up about OpenLCA. Use some of these open source type programs to give you an idea of what's going on out there. There's all kinds of places you can do that. So as a young engineer, embrace the methane side, embrace the carbon side of solutions to the economy. It's going to be as important as the drilling department, and the completions department is going to be the carbon reduction department in oil companies in 10 years. Be there first. Be the person that they need. They're looking for people like that. Secondly, the syllabus. This is a really good question because we as SPE board members discussed this at length. Dr. Tom Blassingame, who's coming up as the new president, you know, we had rigorous arguments in the board meetings about curriculum. He's a professor. He understands it. Do we teach students to be data scientists that understand petroleum systems? Or do we teach students to be petroleum engineers in a classic sense that are good with data? Vice versa, do we teach them to be good with carbon? The syllabus is going to change, and I hope it changes, and I hope it changes with more focus on fugitives and carbon pricing. I hope it changes with more syllabus on data management. But I don't think we should be data scientists that are good at oil and gas. I think we should be petroleum engineers and hydrocarbon scientists that are good at data. So this is a very valid question. I am not the guy to answer it, but it's a very valid question. And I think we need petroleum engineering programs to be energy programs. You know, Delft University in Holland, I believe their department has changed its name to an energy, more focused energy name. A lot of departments around the world are changing to not just petroleum engineering, but energy engineering or energy, the word energy in the word. So I think there's a bright future, but focus on some of the other alternative things. The world can criticize the oil and gas industry but they still line up and use our products, our fertilizer, our petrol, our high temperature steel and concrete, our our jet fuel, our heating fuel. So no matter how much they try and remove us, we still provide 80% of the world's power and 40% of the world's green stuff in agriculture. We have a big responsibility. Let's just talk about being more green, more carbon sensitive, more emissions friendly, non-emissions friendly, whatever, don't emit. Let's talk about that as students going forward and as young professionals. The world will notice. If the ESG report in your annual report is about petroleum engineers doing the right thing, capturing methane, the world will notice that we are energy providers doing the right thing. So don't be an old boy like me. Be a young thinker that's all about reducing your carbon footprint.
Okay, I guess we have one more room for the last question. Okay, this is talking about the carbon tax. What is the best way to reallocate the tax income? Will it be for renewable energy sector?
Yep. Wonderful question. Wonderful question. And in my peer group, there's a lot of this, carbon tax is bad, blah, blah, blah. And I understand we don't want more taxes, right? But here's the bottom line. In my opinion, we need to have some sort of levy, that's another word for tax, on the use of carbon. Now, we should take that tax or levy and put it towards greener or more energy efficient solutions. I think here in Alberta, the province of Alberta has done a tremendous job in setting aside the taxes on carbon into a separate fund that literally funds a lot of these initiatives that help producers change out emission devices that are emitting high numbers. So carbon tax is inevitable. I've suggested, probably not a good idea because I'm not an economist, but I've said, look, why don't we do away with income tax? Instead, have a carbon tax on everything. Instead of income tax, maybe we should look at everything we touch that uses carbon is a tax. Change the whole model. No income tax, everybody would be happy. But then carbon tax equals about the same amount. But we're saying every time you use carbon, you're paying a tax. And then people will think about it. I think that every piece, every object around us should have a little tag on it like food does. Food here in Canada has a little tag that says how many calories, how much fat. Everything we touch, steel, fertilizer, automobiles, trains, everything we touch should have a tag saying how much carbon this used. When I'm walking on a piece of concrete, how much carbon did it take to make this concrete, to clink the cement? So I like, I'm going to watch what I say because I don't want to, having a levy on carbon usage is a healthy thing to make people aware that we use carbon and we should try to reasonably reduce it. That's okay. Being a greedy person in a government agency taxing carbon because it's a sin tax and easy to identify, I got a bit of a problem with that. So this is the problem with the word carbon tax. You elect a politician, they're like, we want to do this and we're going to make a carbon tax, and they make a carbon tax and it's just another tax and it goes into the general revenue of whatever. That's not so good. But a levy on the use of carbon to raise the awareness of people everywhere that carbon is everywhere, carbon use is everywhere, hydrocarbons make carbons, and we should reduce them. That is not a bad thing, but it has to be done in a non-political manner. So I am not opposed to carbon taxes. I think carbon levies are healthy, but the funds have to be redirected to more energy efficiency and not just the general revenues of the government.
Thank you, Darcy, once again.
Ichal, I think I've offended at least half of your audience in one way or the other, but I'm sorry, that's me.
Okay, I think that's all. Thank you so much for the enthusiasm on today's SPE Virtual Talk. But I'm afraid we already reached the end of our sessions. Some takeaway notes from today's interesting subject are: first, the greenhouse gas emission and methane can be so dangerous, but with the proper action, we can handle it properly. And it's solely our responsibility, especially in oil and gas industry, to support the environment sustainability by reducing the methane emission. Let's make a significant difference in the next, let's Darcy say, like 5 or next 10 years. And young generation is on your turn. Okay, thank you again, Mr. Darcy, for the sharing. Any closing remark?
I'm so thrilled that you asked me to talk. I wanted a discussion. I don't want to make enemies. I just want people to think and talk. And you did a wonderful job facilitating thinking and talking about this really important issue. So thank you so much. And I hope to see you sooner than later.
Yeah, I hope we can meet here somewhere in Balikpapan, or I can go there after things finish. Okay, that's all for today. Don't forget, we also have feedback form in the chat box. You can see the link. Please help us to fill. It won't take more than 5 minutes, believe me. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at SPE_BPN to have insight on our latest activity. If you have some more question, please send the question to us and we will give to Darcy later on if you still have something in mind that you want to ask. I am Rizal Rahman. Thank you for the sharing tonight. Have a good day. Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you, Darcy.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.